cathedral, and it hasn't been full of people of determination and dedication. I've never forgotten that amazing rally we did to parallel the Tory party conference here one year, where there were people outside the doors and everywhere. That's the spirit of Manchester, that's the spirit of the unions in Manchester, and that's the spirit of your party, not UK. So a big thank you to Corbyn Voice Choir for singing tonight, and I hope that we make it a norm of all of our public events that we include music, we include poetry, we include art, that we are a creative party and we give people space for that creativity. And through the Peace and Justice Project over the past 4 years, Sam Sweet, who's here tonight, has been organising music for the many concerts all over the country to defend live music venues and give young musicians a chance to play that they wouldn't otherwise have. Because I do think that socialism and social justice, yes, of course it comes from economy, yes, of course it comes from an understanding of the world, but it also comes from unlocking the creativity that is there in all of us, and it should never, ever be hidden away, and we don't want that to be the case. We are obviously getting ready for the conference in Liverpool on Saturday, and a journalist asked me the other day, how's it going? I said, great. He said, are you sure about that? I said, absolutely certain. And he said, why are you so certain? I said, well, there is no handbook on how to establish a political party, but I'm going to write one afterwards, and I'll let you have a copy of it. And I am determined that the Liverpool conference will be huge, that we know already, that it will also come to the conclusions necessary to establish the party, to establish basic rules, constitution and organisation, but above all, people will leave Liverpool, or if they're following it online, understand that we are utterly determined to offer a real political alternative in this society, which is not being offered by any of the major parties at the moment. And so, the idea is a branch structure that will be representative of all communities, and crucially, every branch will be asked to make sure that every month, without fail, they organise an open public event when they relate to the issues faced by that community. And so that if people are worried about housing, worried about the way landlords are behaving, worried about local health facilities, then our party, your party, will be the place to come. And we'll join with people in those campaigns together. So the whole political idea, organisation and mandate comes from grassroots activity. And that is what I want to achieve coming out of the Liverpool conference. It's about including people that have never been involved in politics before, people that have been involved in politics in different organisations, or people who are just worried and frightened about the way our society is going. And I was asked 2 questions to put into my speech if I would, and that I will certainly do. One of them was, what will we do about young people in the party? Well, the membership age is 16 as proposed, and if that's voted on, that will be what's agreed. We could go lower, although obviously we'd have to bring in safeguarding procedures for branches and things, but I absolutely want there to be a fully functioning and autonomous youth section within the party, so we mobilise young people in their image and their determination of the kind of world they want to live in, because young people are shortchanged in our society, over-tested and overstressed in both primary and secondary schools. If they get to go to university, end up with massive debts, and because of the housing crisis affecting the whole country, then they're often sharing places for many years, or paying through the nose for private rented sector, or a bit of both, or having to go back home and stay with their parents if they can. So we need to have the voice of young people absolutely central in the party, making those demands on education, on housing, and on the way in which the job market can work for them in the future. That, to me, is very important. The other question I got was on the organisation in the local areas. Yes, we are obviously a national organisation as a party. We have the huge database of membership which has joined up, and the voting conference will be done online. on Saturday and Sunday, and that means everyone will get a vote. There is also the sortition process for people attending the conference, which I know is very controversial, and I've listened to many points of opinion on sortition. The reason that it was put forward and is being used on this occasion, we may change it for the future, that's up to the conference, is that a lot of people have come together who don't know each other, never been in parties before, and I thought that if we'd use the sortition process, we'll get, yes, a random selection of people coming, but it will be a very genuine cross-section of all those that are coming. It doesn't disenfranchise others, it's novel, it's different. Let's see how it works, let's see how it goes this weekend, and in future conferences we could do a combination of sortition and delegates. It's up to us to decide what we want to do, but we don't have to model ourselves on everything that's done in other parties. And as one who spent a lifetime having a difficult relationship with the Labour Party bureaucracy, I do not wish to repeat the performance of the Labour Party bureaucracy in any way within our party. Now we are meeting on the eve of the budget, which is why I've got to rush back to London as soon as I've finished this evening, because tomorrow the budget comes out. Now, we're in a society where an awful lot of things are going badly wrong. We are the 5th richest country in the world. We do have enormous levels of wealth within our society. But I just give you some figures. Child poverty, 15% of people in the UK were in absolute poverty on low income before housing costs last year. 18% in absolute low income poverty after housing costs. 4.5 million children living in poverty, an increase of 100,000 on the previous year. 44% of all children living in poverty are living in households where someone is disabled. 72% of poor children live in working families. 44% of children in families with 3 or more children are in poverty, far higher than families with 1 child. Poor families have fallen deeper into poverty. There are 3.1 million children in deep poverty compared to 2.9 million last year. And so it goes on and on. These depressing statistics ahead of the budget. Increasing in child poverty, increasing unemployment, increasing homelessness, increasing personal debt, increasing hospital waiting lists, increasing housing waiting lists, and so it goes on and on and on. Then you ask yourself, this government that was elected only, 15 months ago, 16 months ago, what have they actually been doing during that period? What have they actually been doing to improve the lives of the poorest people in our society? They even expelled Labour MPs from the Parliamentary Labour Party for voting to end the 2-child benefit cap. They threatened them with expulsion for opposing the attempted cut in personal independence payments and the removal of the winter fuel allowance. And so it goes on and on. And still a failure to compensate the WASPy women and so much else. At every single term where there's been an opportunity of improving the lives of the poorest people in this country by rejigging expenditure towards them, that has simply not happened. We've got austerity 2.0 going on in stilts at the moment. And in the health service, the claims that the waiting lists are falling is challenged very strongly. And whilst they might be wanting to spend more money on health, the reality is that the health service is completely undermined and threatened with destruction by the role of the private sector within the NHS. The average cost of a private finance initiative deal in most hospitals in England is 15% of all expenditure. Think about that. 15% of all hospital expenditure goes on servicing private finance initiative debts brought in by Tony Blair and Alan Milburn. It'd be a bit like buying a house with a credit card. Completely crazy way of funding any kind of public service, and we're all paying the price for that. And there is at least £10 million per week taken out of the National Health Service in profits by the private sector contracted into the NHS. Under the Health and Social Care Act, local health authorities are required to put services out to tender and basically sell off bits and pieces of NHS services to the private sector all the time. These things are disgraceful and disgusting, and if you go into any hospital, you see nursing staff, other staff running around working incredibly hard and incredibly stressed, and you ask them why, and they say, well, there's not enough staff. Then you find the numbers of nurses and doctors looking for work, and you think, well, how is this possible? It's possible because pretty well all hospitals have created a deliberately high level of vacancy factors in order to save money. I've just been told that my own local hospital has been told to save £20 million over the next short period. It's that sort of thing that's happening in hospitals all over the country. So there has to be something different and better that is done for the future. And so what Rachel Reeves has done at the head of the budget is to make a very long speech, mainly to an audience of city financiers, about how she is only concerned about the debt-to-income ratio. She's only concerned about ensuring that she doesn't upset the markets and ensuring that the government is seen to be, in terms of the financial correspondence, financially competent. Just think of doing things differently. If we had a government that measured itself about its ability to reduce poverty, about its ability to house the homeless, about its ability to reduce the numbers of people suffering from severe mental health because of the stresses in their lives. How about a government that measured itself on increasing working class living standards rather than dropping them? In average, they've fallen by 20% over the past 15 years. But she's not doing any of that. She's measuring it all against a set of parameters she set herself to box herself in, which will mean tomorrow I do not think there's going to be any good news for anyone that's in housing need, health need, mental health need, education need, or any other kind of need. What we surely need is a completely different approach, where we have bottom-up economics, where you deal with the problems that are faced by every community, and from that you would get the economic growth, you would get the investment in green energy and green industries, and you would get lower levels of unemployment, and particularly of youth unemployment. To me, these are the absolute priorities, and that is what we will be putting forward in our arguments against the budget tomorrow afternoon and evening when it comes out. But there's one area of spending which is apparently sacrosanct, absolutely sacrosanct, and that is on defence and armaments. Starmer told us that he wants to increase defence expenditure. He started off by saying it would go up to 3%, and then that suddenly became 4%, and then the NATO leaders chipped in, and so suddenly it's become 5%. That's going to be at least £13 billion per year more on armaments. And we're developing American-built F-35 jets to carry nuclear weapons in the sky, and to continue the idea that Britain should have a global role in armaments around the world. And so we're being told in shorthand terms, accept the cuts, accept the poverty, accept the difficulties, because we're putting all this money into arms and defence. And indeed, Liz Kendall used that very argument when she was trying to cut expenditure on personal independence payments for people with disabilities. Surely there has to be a different set of priorities and a different way of doing things. That means we have to link in the issues of the war economy and peace around the world, where I would love to see a government determined to bring peace around the world rather than constantly search for more expenditure on more and more weapons. Through the Peace and Justice Project last year, we produced a book called The Monstrous Anger of the Guns. It comes from the Wilfred Owen poem, Anthem for a Doomed Youth. And in that poem, he talks about the way the youth died on the trenches in the First World War. And the only people that obviously that made money out of it all were the arms trade. Last year, $2.4 trillion was spent on armaments around the world. Imagine if only 10% of that had gone to the World Food Programme, had gone to the United Nations, had gone to overseas aid, had gone to investment in people's problems. Surely we'd have a much safer, a much more secure world as a result of that. So I want us to be able, as a party, to put together some real alternatives in peace, real alternatives in environment, real alternatives in economy. So a couple of suggestions for Rachel in case she's listening in tonight. How about a wealth tax? 2% on those earning over 10 That would bring in £24 billion per year. That would give you quite a lot of money to help ending the two-child benefit cap, which you could do for £1.4 billion a year. How about using some of that to invest in housing so that local authorities are not stuck with the Hobson's choice of how much of the land they have to give to the private sector in order to develop properties for sale or for what they call affordable rent, which is not affordable. How about local authorities have the borrowing power or the investment capital in order to build council housing for lifetime tenancies on secure rents that people can afford and give them the ensuring that in the private rented sector, which I welcome the legislation that went through that ends no-fault eviction, that is obviously a good thing. It's a shame it's not yet in operation. It doesn't come in operation until next year. But in reality, what we have to look at is the horrendous levels of rent in the private rented sector and the money that's been made out of the private rented sector, some of which is paid through housing benefits. So how about doing something really revolutionary that's done by other countries around the world, including the USA, and have rent controls so people know what their rent is and to save money, let's, as I said earlier, get rid of the PFIs in hospitals. And I remember discussing this with John McDonnell before the 2019 general election, and we hit on the idea that we would actually take them over by the Treasury, and they would become a national issue where they'd be repaid in Treasury bonds at a fixed rate of interest, and the burden would be lifted from the local hospitals who could do what they should be doing, which is treating patients, not subsidising the banking sector. And we will do the same with the schools. Rebuilding schools over building schools for the future has resulted in a massive cost and a massive debt to every school that was rebuilt during that process, very like the PFIs. So there's so much that we have to do. But we have to raise people's spirits about what is possible in this world. Communities that have lost their primary industries, that are facing high unemployment, that are facing all kinds of spending problems by their local authorities, become very depressed. Young people seeing their sports facilities gone, their youth centres gone, their libraries sold and closed, swimming pools sold and closed off, leads to a very, very depressing environment across the whole of the country. Then Farage and Reform turn up, say it's a problem, it's very bad what's going on, and then miraculously every single problem that Farage and his cronies identify is always the fault of refugees. It's always the fault of people that have chosen the relative safety of a leaky boat crossing the channel rather than staying and being abused by fascists and the police. And then we end up with the attacks on the migrant hostels and so on, and we end up with something eerily, nastily familiar from the history of Germany in the 1920s. As a society, surely we can do a bit better than that. Can't we look upon people who have had to flee from wars, from famine, from human rights abuse, from environmental degradation, as victims of those situations? Can't we recognise the millions that we spend as a country in a war in Afghanistan, which has left the Afghan people desperate and poor and suffering appalling human rights abuse while the rest go away? Aren't we partly responsible for them seeking refuge around the world? What goes round comes round. Surely what we need is a human and humanitarian approach towards people. The history books of the 21st century are going to record all those that died in the Mediterranean, or died crossing the Channel. And they're going to be saying, what were you all doing? What were you all doing that you stood by and watched this happen? What were you all doing that you witnessed live on television, the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the occupation of the West Bank and the wars in Sudan and Ukraine and the Democratic Republic of Congo and other places? And instead of trying to stop those wars and bring about peace, you invested in the arms industry, which has made the situation worse in every single one of those situations. And so, we're going to be putting out some, yes, challenging messages. But the alternative is what? The racism of reform, the division of reform, which in reality is on behalf of those that want to create the rather nasty, rather divided society that we have, only making it considerably worse. Labour in government for the past year has absolutely failed to deliver for the very people that elected it, thinking it was going to deliver for them. That's why we have an alternative in your party. So, were there a substantial number of MPs from your party in Parliament, we wouldn't be taking away jury trials, which is what the Labour government is now proposing to do. We'd be defending the rights of people to have a trial by jury. We wouldn't be trying to walk away from the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights. We wouldn't be introducing digital ID systems and all the surveillance systems that go with that. We instead would be demanding investment in people's lives, investment in a decent future for young people and all others. And we'd be looking to work for a world of peace and environmental sustainability. The greatest threat to all of us comes from climate change and the loss of biodiversity around the planet. The greatest threat to all of us comes from social inequality and social division. It's time for there to be a voice that's saying something very, very different, and that is what we're going to be doing. That's why we need to come together, and we are. That's why we need to be united, and we will be. That's why we need to be that voice at the local level to articulate the concerns and the fears that people have and turn those fears into a positive. People working together to achieve the social change and justice that we know this country needs, and we will be working with people all across Europe and other parts of the world to try and achieve that. Your party is your party. Your party is your democracy. Your party is your voice. And don't be more excited about the possibilities of what we can all achieve together. So come Sunday, after that, we're out there doing the campaigning to bring real social justice, real change, and real peace to this world. Thank you very much.